On May 23, 1934, a storm of gunfire ended the lives of Bonnie and Clyde in less than 20 seconds. But what happened after the ambush is the part history rarely talks about. Crowds swarmed the scene, ripping hair from the bodies. The bullet-riddled car turned into a traveling attraction. And legal battles connected to the massacre dragged on all the way into 2019. These are the 16 disturbing facts Hollywood usually leaves out. Fact 1. Over 150 bullets were fired in seconds. At sunrise on May 23, 6 officers waited along a remote Louisiana road near Bienville Parish. They knew Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barrow would eventually appear in their stolen Ford the 5.8. The moment the car rolled into view, the ambush began. Witnesses and investigators later estimated that around 167 shots were fired in roughly 15 seconds. Think about how fast that really is. In the time it takes to tie your shoes, one of the most infamous criminal duos in America was wiped out forever. The coroner counted more than 50 wounds on Clyde's body and over 20 on Bonnie's. The Ford itself was shredded with bullet damage from every angle. Frank Harmer, the former Texas Ranger leading the operation, later admitted the scene was too horrifying for the public to fully understand. What makes it stranger is what happened next. Authorities kept several official details sealed for years. Reports connected to the ambush stayed restricted long enough to fuel rumors across the country. And when governments start hiding documents, people naturally begin asking what else was buried along with the truth. Fact 2. Their bodies stayed inside the car for over an hour. Bonnie and Clyde were likely dead before they even realized they had been trapped. But the officers still hesitated to approach the vehicle. They feared more gang members could be nearby waiting to fire back. For over an hour, the Ford sat motionless on the dirt road with the engine still running. The silence after the gunfire only made the scene more unsettling. When officers finally approached, they discovered the intense gunfire had twisted the car's frame so badly that the doors would not open. Tools had to be used to pry them apart. Clyde's foot reportedly remained pressed against the accelerator even after death. The vehicle was nearly destroyed. Later, the rightful owner of the Ford fought to reclaim it through legal channels. When he finally got it back, it barely resembled a car anymore. Fact 3. Crowds arrived before extra police did. The sound of gunfire echoed through the Louisiana countryside, and locals rushed toward the scene almost immediately. Within less than half an hour, hundreds of people surrounded the ambush site. And this was the shocking part. There was no secured perimeter. No crime scene tape. No organized protection. People walked directly up to the car. Some touched the bodies. Others snapped pieces of glass and metal from the Ford as if they were collecting souvenirs from a carnival. One man even attempted to cut off Clyde Barrow's ear before officers stopped him. Another managed to take a lock of Bonnie's hair. By the time backup officers finally arrived hours later, the entire scene had already been contaminated beyond repair. Evidence was destroyed by pure curiosity. Fact 4. Souvenirs from the ambush were sold immediately. Less than 24 hours after the shooting, people nearby were already selling items supposedly connected to Bonnie and Clyde. Pieces of metal from the car, shell casings, torn fabric, broken glass, anything that looked authentic became valuable overnight. Some locals sold these items directly on the roadside for a few dollars each. One store owner even advertised real Bonnie and Clyde relics to passing travelers. The craziest part? Authorities later estimated that the number of authentic souvenirs being sold far exceeded what could have actually existed at the scene. Counterfeit relics flooded the market almost instantly. But buyers did not care. They were obsessed with owning part of the legend. Fact 5. The funeral home became a public attraction. After the ambush, Bonnie and Clyde's bodies were transported to a funeral home in Arcadia, Louisiana. Almost immediately, crowds began gathering outside. Thousands of people showed up wanting to see the dead outlaws with their own eyes. The funeral home was completely unprepared. Police struggled to control lines stretching across the streets. Parents even brought children to stare at the bullet-riddled bodies as if it were a local event instead of a double killing. For many Americans trapped in the misery of the Great Depression, Bonnie and Clyde had become something larger than criminals. They had become symbols, entertainment, and obsession all at once. Fact 6. Some people tried taking body parts as keepsakes. Curiosity soon turned into something darker. Reports from the funeral home described visitors attempting to rip clothing from the corpses. Others tried cutting strands of hair. One man was reportedly caught with a razor blade while attempting to remove Bonnie's finger to steal her ring. Funeral staff eventually hired guards whose only job was protecting the bodies from the public. Even people directly involved later admitted they had never witnessed behavior that disturbing before. America during the Depression was desperate, fascinated with violence, and completely consumed by the Bonnie and Clyde story. Fact 7. The death car became a touring attraction. The Ford the 5th did not disappear after the ambush. Instead, it became famous. Once returned to its owner, the damaged vehicle was rented to traveling exhibitions and roadside shows across the southern United States. Families paid money just to stand beside the bullet-riddled car. Visitors would place their fingers into the holes left by gunfire while showmen retold the story dramatically to crowds. At a time when millions of Americans struggled financially, people still spent their spare coins just to witness a piece of outlaw history. Decades later, the car would eventually end up on permanent display in Nevada. Fact 8. The car was stolen more than once. The infamous Ford became valuable enough that thieves targeted it repeatedly. During its years touring fairs and exhibitions, the vehicle vanished multiple times. In one case, it disappeared for months before eventually being discovered abandoned inside a barn. The irony was impossible to ignore. The car once used by America's most notorious criminals kept attracting more criminals long after their deaths. Over the years, ownership changed hands countless times, often involving disputes, shady deals, and legal confusion. Fact 9. Officers kept weapons from the ambush. Police recovered a massive collection of firearms from Bonnie and Clyde's vehicle after the shooting. Instead of everything being stored officially, several weapons reportedly ended up as personal keepsakes for members of the ambush team. Decades later, those same guns appeared at collector auctions for enormous amounts of money. Some sold for hundreds of thousands of dollars. What started as trophies eventually became a business built around death and notoriety. Fact 10. The families lost most of their belongings forever. When Bonnie and Clyde's relatives finally arrived hoping to recover personal items, most of the belongings were already gone. Souvenir hunters had taken almost everything. Bonnie's guitar was destroyed and divided into pieces. Cash found inside the vehicle reportedly disappeared without explanation. Her mother ultimately received very little besides the body itself and blood-soaked clothing. To many Americans at the time, Bonnie and Clyde were criminals who deserved no dignity, even after death. Fact 11. Newspapers made fortunes from the story. The local Louisiana newspapers exploded in popularity overnight after the ambush. Small-town publications sold massive numbers of extra copies to readers across the country desperate for updates. Some editors later admitted the Bonnie and Clyde coverage financially saved their newspapers during the Great Depression. The tragedy instantly became profitable media content. Fact 12. Their mothers learned about the deaths through newspapers. Neither family received proper notification from authorities before the story hit headlines nationwide. Bonnie's mother reportedly learned the news from neighbors carrying newspapers. Clyde's family experienced something similar. Reporters moved faster than basic human decency. Even in 1934, the race for headlines mattered more than respecting grieving families. Fact 13. Many Americans called it an execution. Not everyone celebrated the ambush. Some newspapers openly criticized Frank Harmer and the officers for killing Bonnie and Clyde without giving them a chance to surrender. Critics described it as an execution rather than an arrest. But public opinion during the Depression largely supported the officers. Most Americans saw Bonnie and Clyde as violent criminals who had already murdered multiple lawmen. In hard times, people cared more about safety than legal procedure. Fact 14. People believed the car was cursed. As the death car toured across the country, stories of strange accidents began following it. Mechanics reportedly got injured while working on it. Visitors claimed they became sick after touching it. A journalist later investigated the rumors and discovered every incident had a normal explanation. But by then, the legend had already spread nationwide. And honestly, the truth never mattered much. America has always loved cursed objects and haunted stories. Bonnie and Clyde's car became part of that tradition permanently. Fact 15. America became divided over the spectacle. Even back then, people argued fiercely over how society treated violent criminals after death. Religious groups condemned the public obsession surrounding Bonnie and Clyde's bodies. Others insisted the criminals deserved no sympathy at all. Almost a century later, the debate still exists. Whenever infamous people die violently, society always splits into the same argument. Should they be remembered with dignity or turned into spectacle? The question has never truly been answered. Fact 16. The legal battles lasted nearly a century. Bonnie and Clyde died in 1934, but lawsuits tied to their story continued deep into modern times. One of the final major legal disputes ended in 2019 and focused on weapons connected to the ambush. After decades of auctions, collectors, museums, and private sales, ownership records had become impossible to untangle. The courts eventually admitted there was no reliable way to trace everything properly anymore. Think about how insane that is. 2 Depression-era outlaws killed on a dusty Louisiana road were still causing courtroom battles in the age of smartphones. Meanwhile, the bullet-riddled Ford remained on display. Their graves continued attracting visitors. And America still could not let go of the legend of Bonnie and Clyde.